Hello everyone, welcome back to the Flix Files. A big thank you to anyone that's subscribed to my channel at this point. I just wanted to get that in before I start. I've far exceeded the goal that I set for myself in terms of subscribers that I thought I would have at this point. So it's great to see so many people liking the videos that I'm doing and taking the decision to subscribe to, just to keep an eye out of what I'm doing in the future. So thank you so much. So today I thought it was time I did another James Bond video. I think the second video I ever uploaded to this channel was about James Bond, and it was about my history with the James Bond films. And it didn't get many views. In fact, as of me recording this, it's probably not even reached 50 views. And there's probably a very good reason for that it wasn't a very good video and I rambled on far too long and it just wasn't interesting. So for my next James Bond video, I wanted to try and give it a bit more pep and make it more interesting. So I thought what I would do, let's do a top 5, but I'll set myself some limitations to make it a bit more difficult. I'm going to do the top 5 pre-title sequences, but you probably think, oh, loads of other people have done that. But I'm going to do the top 5 pre-title action sequences, because there were some pre-title sequences in some James Bond films that didn't really have action in them. They were more to do with setting up the plot that followed. So I thought, yeah, let's do that, but let's make it even more interesting by only selecting those 5 from a certain scope of Bond movies. Now, there's 2 reasons why I'm doing this. The first reason is, in my heart, James Bond ended with 1989's Licence to Kill. So I've always considered the run of movies from Dr. No to Licence to Kill as like the original run of James Bond. And then there was like a 6-year gap before GoldenEye was released with Pierce Brosnan. And then that set off his run of movies, and then Daniel Craig's after that. So we're then up to modern times. But I always saw that, so from GoldenEye onwards, as like a Doctor Who regeneration. In that, yes, it was called James Bond, but in spirit it was a very different beast. And I do like those movies. Pierce Brosnan more than Daniel Craig, but I guess that's something for another video in the future. And I have them all. But in my heart, my James Bond, the James Bond that I grew up with, those James Bond films, finished with Licence to Kill in 1989. So I thought for this top 5, I'm only going to do my selections from that initial phase up to Licence to Kill. And the second reason why I'm setting myself that limitation is that with newer Bond films, the action sequences obviously became a lot more elaborate and exciting and visual effects and all of that. And I thought, well, it would be very easy to fill that top 5 with just all the pre-title sequences from the newer Bond movies. Skyfall and Spectre immediately come to mind. The pre-title sequence of Tomorrow Never Dies is amazing. So I thought if I selected it from some of the older Bond movies, it might make a more interesting video. So that's what I'm going to do.
Meeting you with a view to a kill. Face to face.
A View to a Kill. And the beginning of the movie, James Bond is in Siberia and he's all decked out in his winter gear. He's got his nice big cozy warm coat on. And he's got his skis handy. And I think this is the first time James Bond will have been seen on skis chronologically since For Your Eyes Only. There was a great action sequence in the middle of that movie where he's getting chased by guys on motorbikes. And he ends up going down a bobsleigh on skis, and then there's guys on motorbikes following down. Terrific sequence. But in this sequence, he starts where he's recovering a microchip from the dead body of 003 in Siberia. And he gets spotted by a group of Russian soldiers that continue to shoot at him and chase him down. So we get this lovely little action sequence of a couple of minutes where he's on skis and he's trying to outrun these Russian bullets. And I think they shoot out like the ground that he's standing on, and he falls down through a little ravine. And I'm sure at one point he gets one of his skis shot off, so he's only skiing on one leg. And then he steals a jet ski. That's right. I'm trying to remember it as I'm talking about it. And he gets blown off the jet ski as it explodes. And the front large ski part of the jet ski lands near him. So he ends up using that as like a snowboard. And he's going down the side of this hill on a snowboard. And then he gets to like a small lake at the bottom. And he gets enough momentum that he kind of surfs across the lake to the other side. Now, you probably watch that sequence now and think it's nothing, but I can remember seeing that in 1985 and being so impressed with it, because I don't think snowboards were a big thing back then. And this was like the first time that the mass majority of people had seen a snowboard of that kind in action. And I just remember being absolutely thrilled by it. But you watch it now and it just seems a bit mundane. But in terms of the action sequence as it plays out, it is exciting. So the end of the action sequence is where there's a helicopter that spots him, and there's a guy firing at him through the side of his helicopter. And in a brilliant kind of James Bond improvisational moment that he's always really good at, he fires the distress flare straight into the helicopter, so it fills up the cockpit of this helicopter with red smoke. And the helicopter then crashes into the side of a mountain. And all in all, it all adds up to like a nice little snow-based action sequence, and a great way to kick off what I think is a terrific James Bond film. I've always had a lot of love for A View to a Kill, especially Christopher Walken. I think he was one of the best James Bond baddies there's ever been. Absolutely love it. So that's my number 5. And Octopussy has a terrific opening where I don't think it tells you where he is, but I'm going to somewhere in the Middle East, I think. And he's infiltrating a military base, and he's wearing a disguise. So he looks like some general called El Toro, I think his name is. And he infiltrates this base, and he's going to blow up this like little radar dish, whether it's some kind of missile guidance system or some jamming system. It never really explains what it is, I don't think, but it's his intention that he's going to blow it up just as he sets an explosive device on. So he's infiltrated the base at this point. He gets caught, and he then gets led out and driven out on a convoy, as if they're going to take him to some sort of prison and then question him. And the Bond girl that's with him right at the beginning of this sequence, she sees that he's been caught, and she follows him in her car, and she's towing a trailer that looks like it's got a horse in this trailer, and she pulls alongside of the truck that James Bond is sat in the back of, and she flashes a bit of leg and distracts the driver, and James Bond he pulls the release mechanism on the parachutes that 2 of the soldiers are wearing, so they fly off the back of the truck. And he ends up overpowering the driver, and then he gets in the back of the horse box that the girl has been towing, and in the back of it is a little jet, this fantastic little jet plane, which then leads into the big action sequence of the pre-titles, where he takes off in this little jet. And the military on the ground fire a anti-air missile up at him, and he's trying to outrun this missile. And there's lots of aerobatics as he's flying around trying to get this missile off his tail. And he ends the sequence by flying it into a hangar. So he dives down towards his hangar as they're closing the doors, and he ends up tilting the plane on its side so he can squeeze it through the doors. And he flies straight through the hangar, and of course the missile's following him, and the missile just goes straight into the hangar, and there's this huge explosion. And it's a great sequence, and it uses a lot of tricks. The model work of the actual hangar exploding. And then if you watch the sequence in slow motion, when he's actually flying the jet through the middle of the hangar, the way they achieved that was they had the jet on a pole, and the pole was attached to the back of a pickup truck, and they just drove the plane through the hangar. But they strategically placed things in front of the camera in like the bottom third of the screen to cover this pole. But if you watch it in slow motion for a few frames, you can actually see the pole that's holding the plane up. But it works really well, and that's just like the magic of how they did it. And it's a great sequence. And there's a lovely little bit of comedy at the end of the sequence when he lands the plane and the wings fold up nice and neatly, and he pulls up next to a petrol station and just like asks the attendant to fill her up. And I've seen that jet. They had an exhibition down in London a few years ago of Bond cars, and they had that jet there, and I've got a photograph of me standing next to it. And it's a tiny little thing, but yeah, great action sequence. So in the top 3 spot, we have the pre-title sequence to my favourite Bond movie of all time, which is 1987's The Living Daylights, which was the first film with Timothy Dalton. And this is just a terrific little action moment where they're on a training exercise, the 00 agents, and they're parachuting down onto the Rock of Gibraltar. And it's there, unbeknownst to them, that there's a Russian agent that's out to kill them. And James Bond, while he's in the middle of this training exercise, gets embroiled into this, and he sees one of the agents get killed. And then he spots the assassin and proceeds to chase him down. And the assassin gets into a Land Rover, and as he's driving off, James Bond runs down this side road and manages to jump onto the canvas roof of this Land Rover.
Hold on, you're dead!
Now, there is a road that runs down the side of the Rock of Gibraltar, and I remember reading that it's such a dangerous road that there is a special driving test that people have to do just to be able to drive on this road. I don't know whether that's still the case, but I remember reading that some time ago. So it's just this brilliant little sequence where this guy is driving this Land Rover at a crazy speed down this very dangerous road, while James Bond is doing his damnedest to hold onto the roof. And to add to the terror and the tension, the back of this Land Rover has crates of dynamite in it. And as he blasts through one of the military checkpoints, one of the soldiers opens fire on the back of this Land Rover, thus starting to ignite some of the boxes of dynamite that are in the back of this truck. So we have like a threefold action going on here, where the driver's trying to navigate this dangerous road. James Bond is cutting his way through the canvas roof to get at the driver. And the dynamite in the back of the Land Rover is slowly starting to ignite. And it's just a great, great action sequence. And I can remember seeing this on the big screen in the cinema and just being completely bowled over by it. There's a few shots where you can see that Timothy Dalton is in front of like a green screen. But there are shots where he genuinely is holding on to the top of this Land Rover, and it looks fantastic. And I know that the second unit cameraman, there's an interview where he was saying that Cubby Broccoli, the producer of the Bond films, was very nervous that Timothy Dalton was eager to get up on the roof of his vehicle and do some of the stunts himself. But kudos to him, because it makes the sequence even better. So the sequence ends where he manages to sort of fight the driver, and they lose control, and he drives the Jeep off the edge of the cliff, so it's plummeting down towards the water. So again, in a quick moment of thinking, James Bond kicks the windscreen out and activates his parachute. So he flies out the back to safety, just as the Land Rover falls and explodes with the driver inside it. And it's a great sequence, and I love it so much. And it's probably, of all of these sequences that I'm talking about, this will be the one that I'm showing the most clips from, even though it's only at number 3. You probably think, well, if you liked it that much, why didn't you put it at number 1?
For your eyes only can see me through the night.
Well, that's because at number 2, we have a terrific piece of action from the opening of For Your Eyes Only from 1981. And I remember seeing an interview with the director John Glenn, and he said that he got the idea for this sequence when they were at Pinewood one day, and they were, I think they were on like a tea break, and he was stood out in the car park chatting with one of the crew, and one of the crew had brought their son along with them that day. And to keep him busy, the son was driving a little radio-controlled car in the car park and just driving it around on the concrete. And that's where he came up with this idea for this action sequence. So at the beginning of For Your Eyes Only, James Bond is laying flowers at the grave of his dead wife, which is a lovely callback to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where George Lazenby was the only Bond actor who starred in a Bond movie where he actually got married, and he got married to Diana Rigg, but she got assassinated right at the end of the movie. So in For Your Eyes Only, there's a lovely callback where he visits the grave of his dead wife and he's putting flowers on her grave. And the vicar runs up to him and says that he's had an urgent call and there's a helicopter that's coming to collect him. So he gets on this helicopter, and it's then that he finds out that Blofeld is in control of this helicopter, and he electrocutes the helicopter pilot by buzzing his headphones. So at that point, Blofeld is sat in his wheelchair at the top of this nearby building with his cat, and he's flying this helicopter using these controls that he has on his wheelchair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bond. Don't concern yourself with the pilot, one of my less useful people.
And it's a great action sequence, and the stunt work is incredible, where James Bond is sat in the back, and to get into the pilot's seat he has to open the side door and stand on one of the landing struts of the helicopter to try and get his way into the front. And all the while Blofeld is flying this helicopter in crazy ways, and he has to hang on, and it's just terrific stunt work. And he finally gets into the front of the helicopter. And there's a moment where Blofeld flies him into like a big warehouse that uses a really cool bit of forced perspective model work as they fly into the entrance of this building. And it's while they're flying in this building that he spots the wiring for the remote control mechanism, and he manages to pull the wiring out and short circuit it, which gives him control back to the helicopter. So he then flies the helicopter to where Blofeld is. And it's this great shot of where he flies it down low, and he uses one of the landing struts to jam it underneath Blofeld's wheelchair and lift him up into the air. So he's flying around with Blofeld still in his wheelchair, hanging onto the side of this helicopter. And there's a really good line in it that makes me laugh, where Blofeld is begging for his life, and he makes him an offer. So he's like going, let me down, let me down. And James Bond says,
Oh, you want to get off? Mr. Bond!
And he then proceeds to drop him down a big chimney pot. and it's just brilliant. And then with the camera zooms into the chimney pot, and then the credits start to roll. And it's a terrific action sequence. And as I say, if they filmed that now, it would probably be 3 times more exciting, because the advancement in stunt work and safety would make it even more thrilling in what they could achieve. And also, you know, CGI, we've got to bring up CGI and how that would influence that scene. But for when this was made in 1981, this was just terrific. And I can remember seeing it for the first time and being just blown away by it. And as a movie, For Your Eyes Only has some of the best action. And if I do a top 5 action sequences in James Bond, full stop, then there will be action from this movie that will be in that top 5, without a doubt. Right, so the number 1 spot.
To your side, just like the moonraker goes in.
So in my mind, the best action in the James Bond pre-title sequence is from Moonraker. And I saw this at the cinema, and I can remember as a 9-year-old watching this unfold on a big screen and just being completely on the edge of my seat with it, because it felt so real, because it is so real. And James Bond is in a private jet and he's smooching with this woman. And just as he's getting really lucky, the pilot bursts out with a pistol and holds him at gunpoint, and he shoots the controls of the jet, and James Bond ends up throwing him out the plane. And as James Bond is standing in the doorway of the plane, watching him fall, Jaws, one of the main henchmen, sneaks up behind him and pushes him out of the plane without a parachute. So down he starts to fall. And the whole sequence is just real. There is very little, in fact, there's very few shots that are blue screen. I think there's a few shots of a close-up of Roger Moore where he's obviously hanging with a big strong fan blowing in his face. But I would say 95% of it is real stuntmen. And they did a number of dives to film this sequence. And I can't remember the exact number, but I remember it was a lot. You know, it was like 40, 50, 60 different free-fall dives. And they filmed each part of it as one little sequence, just a few seconds long. And then it was all put together in the editing suite. And it's just such a thrill ride. As James Bond soaring down towards the bad guy who's wearing a parachute, and he intercepts him and they have a tussle. And he ends up taking the parachute off of the bad guy and putting it on himself. And he kicks the bad guy away from him, so he falls to his death. And then just as he thinks it's over and he's just waiting to deploy his parachute, Jaws comes screaming up behind him and starts attacking him. So he has a tussle with Jaws. And just as Jaws is about to bite down on his leg, I remember, James Bond pulls his parachute, which immediately decelerates him. So he flies up into the air. And then Jaws thinks, right, I'll have to do the same. And he pulls his parachute cord and just does it with such force that he rips it completely clean. And he ends up free falling right down onto a large circus tent. And Jaws being Jaws, he survives it. But it's a fantastic sequence. And even now, as I'm talking about it and I'm trying to play it through my mind, it's just so well shot. And it was directed, that sequence, by John Glenn. And John Glenn went on to direct the next 5, I think, Bond movies. He did For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, A View to a Kill, Living Daylights, License to Kill, yeah. So obviously the producer saw the terrific work that he did with this sequence and gave him the job of director for the following 5 movies. And I'm glad they did, because I love the movies that he directed. So there we go. That is my top 5 James Bond pre-title action sequences. And I hope you agree with my choices, or maybe you'll want to move them around in a different order. Please let me know. As I say, I've deliberately omitted the later Bond movies. Maybe I'll do another video further down the line where I'll do my top 5 action pre-title sequences from GoldenEye onwards. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week.
Bond, James Bond. Exercise Control 007 here. I'll report in an hour. Won't you join me?
Better make that two.